Hello viewers. Today we shall discuss new media. In one of the earlier episodes also we have discussed new media and we have traced the 5 principles of new media as enumerated by Lev Manovich, who is a media scholar. In today's lecture also we shall recall Lev Manovich and we will see how Manovich has traced the history, the genesis of new media from say the 3rd decade of the 19th century. And this is entirely Lev Manovich's take, his own history of the new media, so to say. So let's see how he has traced this history. We shall begin with Charles Babbage. In the year 1833, Charles Babbage gave the design of an analytical engine. Now, what's an analytical engine? It's a hypothetical machine that is capable of performing mathematical operations, all kinds of mathematical operations. So, it operates with punched cards. This is what a punched card looks like. I do not know whether your generation has ever seen punched cards. This is what it looks like. And you can code a punched card with numbers, with alphabets, and also with certain commands. So like that, the analytical engine was fed with punch cards which had the data in the form of numbers, primarily numbers, not so much alphabets, and also certain commands. And the design of the analytical engine was such that it could take in the data, it could follow the commands, and it could carry out operations, and based on the result it could decide what next operation to carry out, and then the final result will again be stored in punch cards or could be printed out. So that is, even you know that today also computers work that way. So that was the first design of an analytical engine. Unfortunately, not a single analytical engine, he tried to design an analytical engine that would work, but not a single analytical engine could be made into operation because the problems of friction that is there with so many gears working in tandem could not be overcome. Okay, so because of certain technical difficulties, the concept of analytical engine remained on paper as a blueprint, and not a single analytical engine could come out into the market from the laboratory conditions. However, this idea of punched cards, Charles Babbage borrowed from his predecessor called Jacquard. Now, Jacquard was a Frenchman and he was not a mathematician or scientist or anything like that. Jacquard had designed a loom which would automatically weave patterns, leaves and flowers and so on and so forth, and again it using punch cards, the threads would pass to the punch cards and the Jacquard's loom would automatically pull the right threads in the right directions and weave patterns. And Jacquard's loom even weaved a portrait of Jacquard with thread, of course, okay, a tapestry containing a picture of Jacquard. So that idea Charles Babbage had borrowed from Jacquard. Now, an interesting thing what Lev Manovich says, that before machines could be invented that would automatically do calculations, machines had been invented that were automatically constructing images, and that is what Jacquard's loom was. And Ada Lovelace was a very intelligent young lady, Britisher, who had written computer programs. Unfortunately, Charles Babbage's analytical machine could not be made operational, so Ada Lovelace's computer programs could not also be put into operation. But she was the first lady who had written computer programs, and she had said that the analytical engine, just as the Jacquard's loom weaves leaves and flowers, the analytical engine weaves mathematical patterns. Well, Charles Babbage had said towards the end of his life, the future generation will be my judge. Whether I have done something useful or not, the future generation will decide. Be that as it may, we now shift again to Paris, and now the year is 1839. Another person called Louis Daguerre, he gave the demonstration of another image making machine to a scientific community in Paris. And that machine he had called the Daguerreotype. Now, he had been working on this machine for several years, and now he could show that that machine, if somebody sat in front of that machine for half an hour, then that particular gadget could take the impression of that person's likeness on a copper plate which was kept at the back of the machine. So, that was a daguerreotype. And he didn't keep the patent of the daguerreotype, he made it free. So, as a result, everybody started making daguerreotypes and doing their own experimentations with it, and they were keeping these daguerreotypes on rooftops and taking pictures of the landscapes and rooftops and chimneys and so on and so forth. And very quickly the daguerreotype improved, the sensitivity of the emulsion improved, and then it could take the pictures of human beings, because a human being cannot sit still for half an hour, but now with the increased sensitivity, pictures of human beings could be taken, and daguerreotype parlors opened at street corners where anybody could walk in, pay a small amount of money and get his portrait made, and then the next day he would come, take the copper plate, maybe he would frame it and put it up in his living room, and he will be happy about the fact that he has got his portrait made. And this was a machine made portrait without the intervention of an artist. So, Louis Daguerre actually democratized the process of image making. Now, everybody could get his own image or the image of his favorite artifacts made using daguerreotypes, and the daguerreotype became popular overnight. So, that was a very interesting development in the history of image making, and also in the history of media, because the daguerreotype eventually evolved into a camera, still camera. Okay, so which is a part of modern media, very much a part of modern media. So, what Lev Manovich is doing, he is tracing two parallel histories. One is the history of media, particularly image making, and the other is the history of computations. All right, and throughout the 19th century, there have been parallel developments of these two histories. They haven't crossed paths yet. They would cross paths in the 20th century, and the two would merge. Now, let us see what else happened in the 19th century. We go now to United States of America, and the year is 1890. Now, the 10 years back in 1880, census of the United States of America was taken, and even in 1887, people were still processing that data manually. You know, the next census was knocking at the door, but the data processed in the data collected in 1880 was not yet processed. All right. So, therefore, what the census authorities did, they called another tinkerer, another engineer called Hollerith, and they said that you please devise a machine, you devise a tabulating machine, because unless and until a machine handles this, it is not becoming humanly possible to process so much data accurately. So, Hollerith designed a tabulating machine, and eventually all the data collected in the 1890 census was fed into that machine, the data pertaining to 62,09,79,766 people. Okay, that was the population of United States of America, at least whose data was collected. It was fed into the Hollerith tabulating machine, and within 1 year the data was processed. There are various kinds of demographic profiles, etc., were published after processing the data. So, that was the beginning of the importance of Henry Hollerith's tabulating machine. And then, as the census board used this successfully, other corporations who also had to crunch a lot of data and do difficult calculations, they started calling Henry Hollerith, and they also started using the tabulating machine, and that became a way of life, at least if not for the common people, for the corporations and big government departments, the railways and so on and so forth. They started using machines for their own calculations and for processing huge amounts of data. This was in the 1890s. Okay. Another interesting thing in the world of image making happened in the 1890s, and that was Thomas Edison experimented with moving images in his own laboratory, And he started recording moving images in his kinetoscope inside his studio, which was called the Black Maria. Right from 1889, he was doing these experimentations, and in 1893, actually he was showing it to a paying public, but not as a projection. People were paying a small amount of money, they were peeping through the kinetoscope and they were enjoying these moving images of various, boxing matches and certain acrobatics and dances and things like that. Okay. And in the year 1895, the Lumiere brothers, they projected it. So they demonstrated the moving images of the actuality events that they had recorded, first to a scientific community and then to a paying public. And the month was December, the year 1895, at the Grand Salon in Paris. People were totally enthralled because this was a very, very new experience. When the images are projected on a screen and you see a train entering a station and workers leaving a factory, which is so lifelike, so real, people were absolutely mesmerized. And then the Lumiere brothers, they send trained cameramen. They called their gadget cinematograph, and those who operated the cinematograph were called cinematographers. So cinematographers were trained in operating these cinematographs, and they sent them all over the world with the cinematograph. They went to every nook and corner. They even came to India. And in India, we had the first cinematograph show in the July 1896 in Bombay at the Watson Hotel in Bombay. So the popularity of this cinematograph spread very quickly, and initially these were just actuality events, but more and more people started tinkering with the cinematograph, people like Georges Méliès, then Edwin S. Porter, and so on and so forth. And the moving images grew in sophistication. They started telling stories, not just recording actualities. They started first creating magical effects, then they started telling stories, and then the paying public, particularly the industrial labor class, they spent a lot of time going into these Nickelodeons, which is small movie halls. They went into the Nickelodeon and they enjoyed these small films. So this cinema, in its rudimentary form, became the opium of mass society. Now, what is mass society? Mass society is a kind of society where a number of people live in close proximity to each other, but they may not be knowing each other, they do not depend on each other for their livelihood, but they are sharing, maybe they are sharing the same apartment house or they are sharing the same para, but they still do not know each other. Now, this sort of mass society had developed in the urban centers as a result of industrialization, because people had started migrating from the villages, coming to the cities for livelihood, for working in the industry, working in the factories, and then they started building houses or started staying in the big cities, and that's how mass societies formed. Now, in a mass society, an individual suffers from alienation because, he doesn't know his neighbors, he cannot connect to his neighbors, so it's like that. So, this new medium, this new opium cinema filled the void in this, the individuals who were part of the mass society. They were atomized individuals. So, it filled the void in the atomized individual's life, and they took to these movies very quickly. All right. Now, Lev Manovich argues that mass society, when a number of people start living together, it generates another need. Apart from the need for entertainment and information, it generates another need. And that need is to keep a tab, to keep a record of all those people living in the city. Now, in a village where the population is much less, everybody knows everybody else. People go to the church to get married. So, in the church register, there is all the marriages, all the births, all the deaths are there in the church register, and that is good enough as a record. But when a number of people start living together and all of them may not be from the same religious group also, then those church registers or these registers maintained by other religious groups are insufficient, they may not be accurate enough, and there is need for more rigorous record keeping and data processing. And that is where these computers or these computation gadgets became a necessity to keep the records about the various individuals who populated this mass society. So Lev Manovich said that this media as well as computation machines both serve the need of mass society in their own ways. And here, although Manovich talks about only still images and then moving images, actually when we say media, we can extend it to newspapers, we can extend it to gramophone records, okay, where the creations of the people were put on record. In still photograph captures a moment. Using a cinematograph, you can archive an incident. Similarly, using a gramophone record, you can keep on record somebody's voice, somebody's singing, all right. So these media were able to record and archive the creative outputs of the people, speeches and important events and so on and so forth, all right. But still their paths haven't crossed, but very soon in the 20th century, their paths would cross. So let us see what happened in the 20th century, particularly during the Second World War. Now, in the year 1936, just around the onset of the Second World War, there was a very brilliant British mathematician called Alan Turing. Now, Alan Turing had written a paper called On Computable Numbers. And in that paper, he had shown that any logical operation could be programmed and could be fed into a computer, and the computer would be able to perform that logical operation. But there had to be a logic. That means the computer had to do it step by step. Any logical operation means which is, it follows a certain logic, it follows a certain cause and effect link. All right. So that was Alan Turing's argument in his paper On Computable Numbers. And he also had designed a hypothetical machine which today is known as the universal Turing machine. Now, this universal Turing machine was very seriously taken up by other engineers who worked with machines, who were in the process of designing these computing machines, because those became the necessity of the hour, the need of the hour. So they designed these universal Turing machines in such a way which would use the simplest of universal Turing machines, would have two paper tapes, okay, as you can see in this diagram. So one paper tape would unwind and another paper tape would take up, and these paper tapes would be coded with zeros and ones, small squares. So one square representing 0, another square representing 1. So it would be coded, and the paper tape would pass through a head, and the head would read off the zeros and ones. Okay, so that was the simplest of Turing machines, and step by step it would take the data, it would recognize the operation, it would carry out the operation, and if need be it would take more data, and so on and so forth. So if there was logic in the operation, then eventually the tape would automatically come to an end when the operation would get over. And if the operation was beyond any logic, human logic, then it would endlessly, the tape would go on and on and on and on, and the machine would keep running to search for an end of the operation. So that was the idea of the universal Turing machine. And as you can see, this is the diagram of the simplest of such Turing machines, and which looks uncannily similar to the cinematograph. Because in a cinematograph also, you feed a spool of film stock on a reel, and you feed another reel. So one unwinds and the other winds. And when the cinematograph is operating as a camera, it is recording every frame, and when the same gadget is operating as a projector, it is reading of every frame and projecting it onto the screen. So without crossing paths, the two types of machines began to look very similar, uncannily similar to each other. And this is what Manovich finds very, very intriguing. Now, in the same year, another German engineer called Konrad Zuse, he was experimenting with these computing machines in his parents' living room, and he was trying to design again a fully digital computing machine. In fact, he is credited with designing the first fully digital computing machine. And instead of these paper tapes, he used discarded film reels. All right, and he punched his zeros and ones on those discarded film reels. And again, Manovich says that had a very eerie effect, that the film reel already had images, images in frames, and over that, superimposed on that, were punched these binary codes in zeros and ones. And so here, for the first time physically, the images and the binary codes are meeting. On a physical surface, they are actually meeting. All right. And then, of course, these digital computers developed further, and digital computers were capable of digitizing every kind of information into digital data and processing it. And eventually, these digital computers today, they can not only do complicated calculations, that is nothing for a digital computer, but it can do image processing, it can handle text, it can handle audio, because everything is eventually digitized into zeros and ones, and that is something we have discussed in the earlier episode. So that is the history of new media as enumerated by Lev Manovich. So historically, to conclude Manovich's theory, I am saying historically, we first developed technologies that automated media construction, that is camera, vinyl records, tape recorders, video cameras, etc. These technologies allowed us for over a course of 150 years to accumulate an astounding amount of media material. Then this led to the next stage of media evolution, that is, all that media material was digitized and stored into computers' hard disk space, and also the computers were programmed to retrieve this media material whenever necessary. And that is how the two media that have had parallel development throughout the 19th century and half of the 20th century eventually met. So now let us see that today what is the status of new media, and I'll just give you 5 or 6 examples, typical examples. One is Wikipedia. Now, why Wikipedia is important? Because previous Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. Prior to Wikipedia, we have had encyclopedias. But Wikipedia is an encyclopedia of a magnitude which was unforeseen. All right, because it is a collective, it is a collective knowledge of the people. Anybody can contribute to the Wikipedia. There is a certain protocol to be followed. So even you and me can also contribute to the Wikipedia, and there are editors and people who will see whatever we are contributing, and they will keep an eye on that. So as a result, Wikipedia is there has 29 million users, and it is there in 219 languages. Can you imagine? You can't think of an encyclopedia of that magnitude without digital technology and without the collective intelligence of the people all over the world working to construct it. So Wikipedia is unique, and it is uniquely new media. All right. Then the next thing is something that we all are familiar with, and that is Facebook. So Facebook has, it was launched in 2004 by Mark Zuckerberg, as you know, and till date, it is a dozen years later, we have almost 2 billion Facebook's monthly active users, and which is more than WhatsApp and Instagram. And of course, the most common demographic age is 25 to 34. So Facebook is based on our basic need, which is need for friendship, and we can make virtual friends using Facebook. Then the third thing is again a trend, which is selfies. Now, why are selfies important? Because selfie is a way of creating self-portraits, and there you do not depend on how society looks at you, but you tell society how you want to be looked at. So you create your own self-image and you upload it and circulate it, and therefore if you want, you can break the conventions of beauty, you can break any kind of conventions put by society or put by artists, and you can create your own images. Then Twitter. Twitter is also gaining popularity, and Twitter is like a mirror. Because why? Our angst and our real feelings, when we are face to face with people, we cannot speak out, we cannot be frank. But on Twitter, we can be frank. All right, and sometimes we are taken by surprise by our own frankness, and that is all there on record. It's not wiped out. So after a few months, if you see your own tweets, you will realize, oh my God, is this my tweet? So it's like that. The Twitter is like a mirror that holds up to you and says that, okay, this is what you are capable of. So the popularity of Twitter is growing, and it is bound to grow, and it will remain an essential part of the way we communicate. Then, of course, e-books, need for libraries. Libraries have been there in ancient Greece, have been there in every civilization. But now, instead of libraries, we have e-books, and this Kindle Paperweight, which weighs just about 200 grams, can store about 1,000 odd books. So that's again a revolution of the new media. And then the latest is Pokemon Go, which I don't know, you must be familiar with, which has again revolutionized video games. There were video games. Now this Pokemon Go is something that, you create your own Pokemon. You can create using certain characteristic by picking and choosing. You create your own Pokemon, and then this GPS system is used to place that Pokemon, that virtually create that Pokemon at real situations, localities, and then you have to track that Pokemon using your phone. All right. So it is a kind of virtual game, virtual reality game, and people have to run around because the Pokemon plants itself in real spaces. All right. So therefore, playing this virtual reality game, you are not glued to your computer and your desk. Okay. You have to get up, and with your phone, you have to run around. So these are some of the things that the new media is bringing out, and it's changing every day. People are inventing, people are improvising, and the character of the new media, the potential of the new media is being unleashed every day. And we have to wait and see what else new media has in store for us. But definitely it's a very exciting medium, and we can look forward to exciting times ahead of us. Thank you very much.